Welcome to our Fireside Chat, Creating a Culture of Innovation. I hope today's session will be very interesting and become a call to action for all of us in here, how we can contribute and be innovative. As Clara said, my name's Deane Eastwood. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. I've been at Harvard now for 30 years. I've never been on this stage, so this is a nice new part of my career. And this is also my 10th IT Summit. I remember the first IT Summit that we've had and really love all of the energy. And I think post-COVID, seeing everybody here and just the energy at lunch, the energy at breakfast, really nice to see everybody connecting. So I'm delighted that all of you could join us for this talk on innovation. We're witnessing, we are all witnessing Harvard and higher ed more broadly grappling with rapidly changing landscape, characterized by technological advances, evolving learner expectations, and societal shifts. I mean, we heard this morning about generative AI, and I think that was a very interesting talk, and that has come on incredibly fast in the last few months. A lot of people are comparing the time period that we're in now to the dot-com era that started in the late 1990s, and I tend to agree. I think we're headed over the next decade for a really exciting and rewarding time in higher ed. And with that, it's going to mean that we're going to need to innovate. There's going to need to be a lot of change. How we work, where we work are different, they're evolving. How we teach and where we teach are evolving. How we learn and where we learn are evolving. And the tools that we're using are all changing. So I think in this session, what we're going to try to do is break it down a little bit and talk about what does it look like on the ground. How do we create a culture of innovation throughout our IT community? And how do individuals, as Clara said, find a way to innovate from where they are, no matter what their role is in the organization? So with that, I'll introduce my panel. To my left is Leo Zhadanovsky, Chief Technologist for Education from Amazon Worldwide Public Sector. We have Donna Tremonte from Harvard. Donna is the Associate Director of Business and Technology Operations and External Relations at the Harvard Business School. Delighted to have Pandey with us, who's a technical project manager at Hewitt and also heavily involved in the Agile ABCD group. And then finally, we have Fritz from Deloitte. He's a principal. So delighted to have you all here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just spend a couple of minutes with each panelist and learn more about what they see in innovation as it relates to higher education. So I think I'll start with you, Leo. A really simple question, simple and difficult question, but I think we should start with what is the definition of innovation? How do you define innovation, and what are the current top trends that you're observing in the industry and as it pertains to higher ed?
Yeah, so I think that to me, innovation means the ability to think of a new idea and then being able to experiment with it, right? So you try it out, you can easily access whatever technology or tools you might need to try the idea out, and maybe it'll fail, and that's okay. And so you should be able to fail fast, and then if it fails, you try something else. If it succeeds, you should be able to then take that idea and, in the Amazon sense, bring it to production, bring it to mass scale, right? So having a process where you can do that for different ideas is super important. There's actually a really good Jeff Bezos quote that I'm going to read here. And basically it says, one area where I think we're distinctive is failure. I believe we are the best place in the world to fail, and we have plenty of practice, because failure and innovation are inseparable twins. To invent, you have to experiment, and if you know in advance that it's going to work, that's not an experiment. Most large organizations embrace the idea of invention, but are not willing to suffer the string of failed experiments necessary to get there. Outsized returns often come from betting against conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom is usually right. So if you're going to given a 10% chance of 100% payoff, 100 times payoff, you should take that bet every time. You're still gonna be wrong 9 out of 10 times, but you'll be right that one time and it'll really pay off. And big winners pay. So that's a verbatim quote. And I think it's really important, having that culture where you can fail and it's not a bad thing, but it's a good thing. And in terms of the trends I see in education, I think the top ones I see are, there's a lot of interest in generative AI right now. And I think just at this point, people are trying to figure out, what can we do with generative AI? Is it useful? Are there ethical concerns? Are there IP concerns? How do we, is it a tool that we can use, and how can we use it? Related to that, I see a lot of interest in just AI ML and taking the data that education institutions have and getting insights out of it, connecting siloed data sets. I've seen that across a lot of higher ed institutions. And then the last trend I see is just that there's no new normal anymore, right? So you really have to be able to be agile. Just in the last 6 months, like generative AI kind of started being talked about and came out of, it seems like, nowhere. And yesterday there was a really interesting announcement about augmented reality, and I think we're just gonna get thrown new things all the time, and we just have to figure out, how do we adapt? How do we learn how to use new things, or figure out if we can use new things and if it makes sense?
That's great. I've always used a very simple definition of innovation as change that adds value, but I like how you've added some other key accelerators in there: rapid pace, prototyping, quick failure. I think that's great. You work at a giant company, 1 million plus employees at Amazon, 150,000 plus at AWS. How does a company like Amazon assess itself while simultaneously managing its growth and its scale?
Yeah, so I think the way that we have set ourselves up so that we can keep innovating is, there's 3 dimensions to it. There's the people, the process, and the tools. So first of all, the people, right? Even though we're a big company, we're set up in small teams, and these small teams have a single purpose. So if you imagine, for example, like Amazon.com, if you look at the front page of Amazon.com, there's like the shopping cart, there's different widgets. Each of those are typically done by a small, we call them 2-pizza team. And that team, we call them 2-pizza teams because you should be able to feed them lunch on 2 pizzas. In reality, that what they say, if any pizza can be a personal pan pizza with enough willpower and determination, right? So what it really means is usually like 7 to 10 people teams, and these teams have full ownership of their little microservice, of their little part of Amazon.com, right, in that example. And so they, from ideating on it, to developing it, to testing it, to running it in production, to supporting it after that. So even though we're a big company, if you look at our org chart, we're all just split up into small pieces, and these pieces are designed so that they have minimal interaction with each other, right? Because the more communication we found that we have between teams, the more that any one decision, the more time it takes, and that's inefficient for us. So these teams are self-sufficient. They try to take the least amount of dependencies possible. Then we have processes and tools. So we give our developers, for example, a lot of latitude on, they can basically use any programming language they want. We have all different kinds of apps. They're, serverless and containers and hardware and virtualization, all that stuff. But we have a tool chain that's unified. So if you're a developer, no matter what team you're on, there's generally one process for writing your code and getting that code sent to production and all the stuff that comes along with that. So that way, when people switch teams, it doesn't take them a long time to onboard, right? So you have this common platform tooling that's really useful. And before we did that, it would take sometimes like months for code to get to production. Now it takes hours or days sometimes. And sometimes we want to slow roll it on purpose just to be safe. So I think that's really important. And also we try to think of like mechanisms. So how do we make ourselves more efficient? So for example, when something's not working, we have a mechanism to take our learnings from that, and make sure it never happens again and fix things. And so we have a lot of different mechanisms all over the place. So that's more like the process part. But for us, it's those three components.
Consistent processes, and I think I'm going to need a bigger pizza budget. Just one last question, quick one on the morning session on generative AI. If you had a crystal ball, what are your predictions on generative AI for higher ed?
So I think just like, we currently use calculators, just the internet in general, as an aid. Generative AI will be like that too, right? It's just a tool that people use. And I think right now, what's really popular is these like general purpose, like APIs or like ChatGPT, where you can go in and ask it a question. But I think a lot of our institutions are going to train their own data sets. So they're going to take the data they have, they're going to take a foundational model that they can use as a base and put that on top of it. And then you'll have like your own, for example, large language model for different purposes. So maybe there's one where I'm a student and I want to ask, about class registration or schedules or something. And I think, you're gonna have to figure out like, how do you keep the data private? How do you make sure that there's no like hallucinations, as they call them, right? So the data is accurate. That's all still really fluid, but I think eventually there'll just be specialized language models for different use cases, specifically with generative AI. And generative AI art is really interesting too. I did a demo a few weeks ago here at an HBS Innovation Day, and people just gave me prompts and we saw what was generated, and it was really interesting. So I'll be interested to see kind of what the use cases from that are going to be.
Great, thank you. Peter, let's turn to you. Your perspective from Deloitte. Leo provided us with a great definition of innovation. Regarding your work in higher education, could you elaborate on ways in which universities and institutions are currently demonstrating being innovative? And what areas do you see getting the greatest attention right now?
I sure hope I can do that. But before I get into that, I did want to add, I think, one little element to our shared definition of innovation. So I've now closing in on about a decade and a half of working with universities and in the higher ed setting in areas of strategy, student lifecycle, digital experience, analytics, so areas that are sort of rife for innovation. And one of the dangers I sort of see pitfalls sometimes is the weight of big innovation sort of putting too much pressure and preventing some of the smaller, really valuable innovations that can happen. So really trying to get away from the idea of innovation has to equate to invention, coming up with something no one's ever seen before, has never ever done. Where I think we see some of the most interesting innovation in higher education is when there's something out there and we're sort of adapting it to our sector. We're bringing it to new parts of a decentralized organization. We're looking into other sectors or even peer institutions and getting good ideas, but bringing it into our own organizations in ways that are innovative and inventive and new to that context. So I wanted to get that out there because I need that to now answer the question that you actually asked around where we're seeing the big innovation. So I think there's probably 5 buckets I would put it into. The first is I'm legally obligated to mention generative AI as number one. Cloud transformation absolutely is a huge one. There are folks who are much smarter than me in that category. The one thing I would say is I think we have seen institutions sometimes that say, well, we had an on-prem data warehouse, now it's on the cloud, transformation agenda complete, great job. It's only scratching the surface, right? Thinking about how you change your policies, your processes, your organizations to really maximize the benefits of any of those technologies is critically important. In terms of, I think the 3 areas where we're seeing a lot of innovation in the higher ed space. One, resource sharing. So this is true for, I think, decentralized organizations like Harvard. We see this a lot with public systems of higher education or even state departments of higher education, where there's much more openness to understanding how we can innovate together at the systematic or the upper level and at the more decentralized level. I've been doing this long enough where it really felt like systems and campuses used to almost have an adversarial approach, right? Systems felt like I need to hold the campuses accountable. I need to enforce policies or regulations. And the campuses really felt like, this is a necessary evil. Please leave us alone as much as possible. And I think we're really starting to see a change in how those organizations work together to solve problems. A real appreciation that one of the jobs of the system or a department of higher education is to provide resources to those campuses that maybe can't afford them at all. And then also an understanding on each campus's side that there's stuff we want to do, but in terms of the technology resources, in terms of the staffing, in terms of the expertise that we need, we can't build that locally. We need to really share that. So I think that's been a really exciting area where there's been some evolution recently. And I would say right here in the state, we've been working with the Department of Higher Education here in Mass around a student success strategy that hits all of the non-UMass public 2-year and 4-year schools. So it's great to really see that sort of thing happening locally. The next is around digital experience. And this is a spot where I'll put on sort of an amateur higher ed historian hat, where it does feel like there is a wave coming that we've been waiting for a long time. So probably since I've been in higher ed, there has been this idea of, of course, we want to be more Amazon-like, we want to be more Google-like in terms of how our students, staff, faculty interact. I would say pre-pandemic, there was a lot of discussion around that, but there really wasn't a burning platform to get there. So we didn't see as much, I think, innovation and progress towards those goals as we might have expected. Then the pandemic hits, and we are innovating like crazy, but very reactionary. It was almost a disaster recovery, disaster response type of situation, rather than being something really planful. And I think we learned a lot of lessons throughout that, and now that some universities, hopefully most, feel like they're getting to a point of stabilization coming out of that pandemic, there really has been an excitement, I would say even in the last 6 to 9 months, of now we understand what that burning platform is, why we need to modernize on the digital side for all of our stakeholders, and we're going to start moving towards that. And then I think the last spot I would bring up is around really defending the value of higher education. And it's been interesting. We have an opportunity with our higher ed practice to have conversations with lots of presidents, lots of chancellors. It's fantastic. And name the problems that are out there: resourcing, government oversight, the enrollment cliff. It really seems like this idea of the loss of confidence, the crisis of confidence in higher education is the thing that's on most people's minds. Even a generation ago, getting a degree, like the value of that was axiomatic. It was barely questioned. Now we're at the stage of more than half of the US population has serious concerns about whether or not getting a college degree is worth it. And we're seeing institutions think about new ways to defend themselves, right? Defend the sector in general, but their institution and their program specifically, to make sure that that value is true. So we've been doing a lot of work when it comes to analytics, to longitudinal studies of earnings. And I think the spot where the surface is really just starting to get scratched is, it's great to be able to see, are people's careers aligning with what they studied? What are they making? Are they recognizing social mobility from an economic perspective? But I think where the real innovation is going to come in the next few years is, how do we start to measure, define the value of some of those non-quantitative aspects? What is that value of a liberal arts degree? What does it feel like to be a healthy citizen, and what's the value of that? So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things there coming in the next few months.
Just drilling down a little bit further about higher ed in general. What qualities contribute to a culture of innovation in higher ed, and what barriers do you see that prevent innovation, especially at a place like Harvard that's so decentralized? It's a great question, and I would say the first one I'd put out there is a lot of institutions, getting back to like that idea of even small innovations are really valuable. There's always that desire to be, what's the big deal? What's the big thing that we did? Identifying ways to celebrate the small wins, celebrate the small innovations, celebrate the things that might seem boring, they're back office, they're not right out in the public view, but that are creating real value and kind of helping the institution evolve is a huge part of that. You sort of set the flywheel spinning of, once people see that that's encouraged, that that's valued, that that's rewarded, you get people into more of a mindset.
around innovation. In terms of the challenges, I think there's probably a couple. The first is, most universities aren't startups. So that idea of doing no harm when it comes to the things we want to innovate, especially when it's around our students or around our faculty, is really important. And I think that creates some very appropriate, some very necessary, and some very valuable sort of guidelines and breakpoints and really double checks to make sure we're not doing something that's going to damage the things that we're already doing. That intentionally and necessarily slows down innovation. It makes us, as established organizations that have been around for a few centuries and done a pretty darn good job, a little bit more hesitant to try new things, and that slows the innovative path a little bit. Not that that's a bad thing to do at all. The other thing I think, thinking about a place like Harvard, there's a very interesting dynamic that we see among what's going to motivate and enable innovation in higher ed. And I'll get back to sort of the innovation thing, right? Like the necessity being the mother of innovation in this case. One of the things when we work with really well-known, well-established, highly ranked institutions like Harvard, like some of your peers, the question I'm always getting ready for is, we want to know what our peers are doing, which is a good, valid question. You should be asking that. But one of my responses always comes back to is if you're really looking for innovation in higher education, especially around the student experience, look to the community colleges, look to the regional 2 years, look to the HBCUs. They're the ones who need to innovate, right? There is a real capacity there where that's required for survival, and you can learn a bunch of amazing things. The flip side, though, is those institutions that are innovating is because they have a lot of other stressors in terms of resources. So they're not always the ones that are able to kind of follow a transformative agenda from a resource perspective as much as you would like. And that's really, I think, the dichotomy, right? A place like Harvard, I don't want to make it sound like you've got all the resources, but there's a decent amount, you're doing all right. Mm-hmm. So being able to understand, even if there isn't that burning platform, what do we have to, we're not fighting for our survival as an institution. How do we drive that sort of innovation agenda forward is one of the challenges I think that a lot of leaders deal with. The other thing I'd say too, just to wrap it up, thinking about what makes universities great for innovation, I'm sure my recipe will be incomplete and there are HBS professors who would slaughter me for this, but when you think about what are the things that should go into innovation, right? There's problems that need solving. Higher ed's got plenty of them, and there's plenty we're trying to solve for on behalf of the rest of the world. You need lots of knowledge. Got that covered pretty well at a place like Harvard. You need a diverse set of perspectives, expertise, skill sets, right? You have all of those ingredients here to be able to really think innovatively and do innovative things. It's just a matter of making sure you've got sort of the right grocery shopper and the right cook to put it all together.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Let's turn to our Harvard panelists. Donna, we've both been here more than 2 decades now. We've seen lots of innovation. You've been an innovative leader. You've had multiple great projects that have gone university-wide. What are some of the key strengths at Harvard that have supported your ability to foster innovation? Can you give a few examples of the structures that we have set up here or some example projects that you've worked on?
Sure, yeah. So I think a key strength, and I may be biased, is our staff. So we have really smart, really creative staff right at Harvard that we can tap into. And, Clara brought it up earlier, but the ABCD group, so that's a great example of a grassroots level group where staff just came together to collaborate, to share ideas, and to innovate with each other. And that's spun off a lot of other subgroups. And Ability Plus is another group where staff came together, saw a gap, saw a need, and innovated and created a community for each other. So I think Harvard is starting to realize this and create different awards and grants that are not only available to faculty and students, but also to staff. So you have the President's Administrative Innovation Fund and the Culture Lab Innovation Fund, both of which you can collaborate with colleagues and apply and get money. I've been lucky enough with colleagues to win a PAFE grant for our mentoring program with Deirdre Schreiber and the Women in Tech Plus Allies, as well as 2 Cliff Awards, one to continue the support of the mentoring program, and then another for the map of inclusive symbols and spaces, which is launching today, if you haven't stopped by and gotten a sticker. And that's a cross-university collaboration that brings everyone together and really brings these ideas to light. Our staff are the ones on the ground talking to the partners, talking to the faculty, students, and hearing about the issues. So the biggest piece, I think, of all of that, of staff and having these awards, and also having programs like the IT Academy where we're encouraged to continually learn and grow. We're in technology, we're all here for a reason, and we all know technology changes, so I think we're all lifelong learners, and so having something like the IT Academy also really fosters that lifelong learning and collaboration. But the biggest piece of all this is really you need the support of leadership and your managers. So these grants are available, but you can't pay yourself. This is all volunteerism. And so to really encourage that volunteerism, we need leadership and managers to understand and give time and really cultivate a culture that is safe and inclusive so that people feel comfortable taking a risk and trying something new and having that chance.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad you brought up the Presidential Administration Innovation Fund. I think that's a great program. It's been around since 2016. More than $600,000 in grants have now been awarded to 54 projects and included 200 people. And most of those are ground up projects. We've used the PAFE fund when we had some innovations at the School of Public Health. So we built a laboratory safety system that works with the fire departments. We needed an avenue in order to make it more of a university-wide tool. And the PAFE was the way that we went, got a little bit of money to seed that. So there are some programs that are really nice, and I encourage people to look into it. Also, the Culture Lab innovation. We have a proposal in now about some training that we did. We do a lot of web streaming with a lot of people that come in from all over government and elsewhere, and we were having difficulty lighting people of color. We weren't getting the quality that we wanted. And we created a training program, brought in some experts on both the technology and the communication side, and taught that program. Now we would like to make that a university-wide initiative. So these are great programs, and I think it's a great bit of support for any type of innovation, whether it's, these are mostly small I innovations, but I think they're super important. Meena, let's turn to you. When it comes to innovation, you're an experienced project manager. You've done waterfall, you've done traditional project management, you're super with Agile, you run the Agile ABCD group. Could you share some of your experiences on using these methodologies and as they relate to innovation?
Sure. And today I'm, representing Agile ABCD, so I'll start with Agile first, right? And I think we have a lot of folks here and many teams that are leveraging Agile. So really, I don't have to elaborate too much, but the key things that you mentioned and you talked about, Peter, also on the experimentation, quick turnarounds, and making things simple. So in this whole process, Agile does encourage, collaboration. It encourages iterative development. It is talking about continuous improvement. So it naturally provides a foundation for, teams to iterate, successfully, have past failures, learn from that. If successful, persevere or pivot, right? So that kind of provides that foundation out there. How does that look like in the grounds? And from that perspective, let me share about the story borrowing from the HBS digital transformation team and how Agile ABCD kind of provided them a platform to share with the rest of the community. So under the leadership of Xenia Parker, the digital transformation team, and more specifically, let me focus on the data platform team there, a small team of 7 went ahead and they were collaborating with the business stakeholders, so the librarians, the faculty research staff, the data analysts, and they came up with the solution for creating this data platform solution, which will help the folks taking day-to-day decisions, do some predictive forecasting analysis and all of that. And all this was delivered just mid-May, within 16 weeks by this small team. What was helpful to them was, of course, this Agile framework, which enabled this team to collaborate with vendors, partners, consultants, and business partners that were across the school, multiple departments. So it was not an easy task. The focus of the team was, what do these departments really need? What is the value? What's the solution that they are trying to achieve? And what is going to be the business value of the solution? So the focus was on the business value, and that helped them prioritize, ensure that budget allocation was provided to the right initiative to accelerate delivery of value. And it was just 2-week sprints, so within 16 weeks there were 8 demos, seeking feedback, continuous improvements, refining the ideas, and building on a solution that is aligned to the expectations of the stakeholders. And all that's obviously facilitated through the Agile framework. Giving a further, and I would like to elaborate on, Peter, what you mentioned, right, about simplifying, making innovations can be small things too. And I totally agree that, on one hand, the business school is, of course, a bigger innovation, kind of breaking barriers between the different higher ed, like whether it is the MBA program or the HBS online, and the executive education. But let's look at the simple areas, right? Within Hewitt, one of my teams, which is the budgeting systems team, right? And they did exactly that. They started their Agile journey somewhere in 2021. And prior to that, the functional team had, been maintaining all the user requirements in Excel sheets, right? And they would meet periodically, review that. The list is growing, but they have not been able to solve the problems. So in 2022, early 2022, my colleague, Maria, she coached them that let's form an Agile team. Okay, so the functional team and the technical team, they came together. And this, again, a small team of 6 people started working on, all their operational activities that they need to do for supporting the budgeting process within the school, any production support issues that might be there, as well as the enhancements. So they started creating their Agile backlog and working off it. And they found that what was daunting earlier when they just looked at the requirements as a functional team trying to solve it on their own became much more easier, because now we had the cross-functional team collaborating together, different ideas, different perspectives coming together, and they were able to build solutions and keep delivering enhancements or production support, fixes, or provide user help. But when this 2022 cycle for the ITCRB project came around, ITCRB, the IT Capital Review Board projects, so $1 million plus was allocated for enhancing the budgeting system to create some integrated planning enhancements. And very simply, this whole ITC project, which traditionally Harvard would have done as the traditional waterfall methodology, just became part of their Agile backlog. And the team has been delivering enhancements. They have built up resiliency, eliminated some of the historical technical debt that was there for 15 years by eliminating some of the processes, and making small improvements on a regular basis, trying to simplify, making it easier to administer the application, and making it easier for the end user The goal, of course, is to have a very simplified process end to end. So that's another example of how I see that there are a lot of opportunities within Harvard to simplify, make the systems easier, and Agile provides that framework which will enable that. And Agile ABCD, of course, is a community that provides a safe space for folks to, bring the questions about Agile, or, project management, whatever the case may be, they can ask questions, they can share their experiences, share the challenges that they have been facing in the projects, and, and we learn collectively and adapt and get better together.
Great. Great, thank you, Meena. I'll now throw a few questions out to the whole group, and then we'll take a couple questions from the audience. But we all want to be a more innovative community. What are some of the key qualities that contribute to an innovative culture? You want to jump on that, Donna?
Yes. So I think one of the key qualities is, again, having a safe space to do the work, to take the risk with the idea, and also making sure you have the culture that supports the staff in bringing their ideas. So I think that we all have a lot of good ideas. Again, we're on the ground, we're talking to people, and you have to be able to, I think it was the CIO panel, the projects where you start to learn about some other things. So I think we have to get more comfortable in leadership, letting staff kind of come out of their lane to explore other ideas. And then that's how we'll start to innovate in increments, as we've talked about.
Leo, you mentioned Amazon is great with allowing people to fail. I mean, Harvard's such an intense environment, competitive, high-performing. How do we get there?
So I think one thing that's really helpful that we try to practice is we have a bias for high-velocity decision-making. So and we try to categorize decisions into two different types of decisions. We think of them as a one-way door decision or a two-way door decision. So most decisions are two-way door decisions, meaning if you make the wrong choice, you can just walk back in the door and you can undo it. So in that case, just make a decision and commit to it. And if if people disagree, that's okay. You disagree and commit, right? And then if it doesn't work out, you undo it. Now, some decisions are one-way door decisions, and those are maybe ones where you can't get it wrong, where something where there's like privacy involved or something like that, where you have to think long and hard about them. But try to figure out what kind of decision is this, and optimize your processes around that. And also having culture where to get to that, everybody feels safe to express their opinion. So when we're arriving at these decisions, we actually have like a leadership principle called have backbone and then disagree and commit. So while you're making the decision, even if I'm in the room with somebody who's like several levels up above me in the org chart, I'm expected to speak up if I disagree. And then once a decision has been made, then we all commit to it, even if we don't agree to it. So I think that's one dimension that we do that helps us innovate and move fast.
That's great. I like that. Disagree and commit. Have anything to add on this one, Peter?
I think just the commitment to scale. I think one of the things we've seen from some clients is a little frustration when you see a pocket of a university, they've done something, it's had success, and then the resources aren't there to take it to the next level. And one of the things we've always encouraged is, gosh, when you find one of those innovations that works, don't just let it die on the vine. Don't just let it stay where it is. You have a commitment as an organization to figure out how to get that as broadly across your institution and hopefully others as possible as you possibly can. And I think that again helps to create that culture of you see that this is rewarded, you see that this is valued, and then certainly you see the impact that it's having on your students, your staff, your faculty, whatever the innovations around.
Great. How about signs that we're successful at innovation? I mean, how do we recognize achievements? How do they do that, Leo, at AWS?
Well, I think when we're trying to, let's say, build a new product, the first thing that we do before we ever write a piece of code or think about architecture or make any technical decisions is we try to work backwards from our customer. And it could be, the customer could be someone internal at Amazon, the customer could be, one of our external customers. And so you figure out, okay, who's the customer, what's their challenge, and how does this product solve that, right? And then once you understand that, then you start making all the technical decisions, and then you can go back to your original, we actually write a document, and we write the press release for what we're gonna launch before we launch it, and then we write FAQs. And we reference that. So then after the thing's launched, we look back and does this address the original intent of what we're doing? And we have different metrics. And we have like operational metrics, performance metrics, but at the end of the day, we go look at, does what we've built solve the challenge that we set out to build? And if it doesn't, we change course to accordingly.
Great. I'd like to take a couple from the audience. Do we have a person with the mic? Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
There's one over there, yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for this really interesting panel. My question is around decision making. So it seems like we have an ever-growing demand for IT needs and a wide range of emerging technologies. How do you all prioritize the opportunities for innovation? Thank you.
Not sure if there's a Harvard view. I'm happy to start talking, but if you guys have an internal perspective first.
Yeah, so I guess, maybe I'll just start off because when we're looking at innovation, and we are sitting right up front here is Erica Bradshaw, right? And we have an emerging technologies innovation program that she's been running, right? So I think if you've been in Harvard, at least when the program was announced, you could bring in your ideas and of what you want to come up with for what solutions you are trying to drive at. And we did have the detailed criteria of how the projects would be selected, right? Because there's a limited funding that is available. I don't recall offhand, so I'm not going to get into those details. But yes, we share the criteria of how we are going to be selecting and sharing that, okay, in this cycle, we will be able to fund X number of projects, and the ideas get presented and shared. So that's one on the Emerging Technology Innovation Program. But in any case, all projects, any funding has to be prioritized, right? And therefore, what is key would be, and I'm going back to the example of the business school, right? So from looking at the digital transformation team, they had to prioritize all the different requests that are coming from the different departments, right? So now, what is the impact that this particular innovation is going to have on the business outcomes? That, if we can justify and show and demonstrate, that was the deciding factor of, okay, these are going to have this important resulting business outcomes. It could be increase in the enrollment revenues that are having, a new program getting introduced, or anything. So it depends on the business value that this innovation is going to make an impact on. That was the criteria that the business pool is making, and of course it had done it based on so starting from the foundations, right? Because we are looking at building this data platform, data lake over the data platform, but then you don't have everything in place to be able to do some of the bigger innovations that we might be wanting to do. Starting small, and how we can deliver those business outcomes being the criteria. And now that they have started on, they're creating these processes for ingesting unstructured data along with structured data. It'll enable more extensions and collaboration of getting the data across all these three areas that I'd mentioned, because today MBA is separate. We do have the the executive education program, which is separate, and then the HBS online. Now, how do you make all this data available, and how can you do analysis, the journey career maps of all the business school graduates that are there, and how can they be, this information we leverage to maybe reach out to the alumni, provide this to external affairs, and maybe have an overreaching impact would be another aspect. And
Right.
ITCRB project, please visit the Hewitt PMO website, and you will have the whole funding cycle and how it's goes.
Great, Meena. I think you made a good point on decision making. The impact is most important, whether it's a small I or a big I. We're always evaluating the impact. Did you want to add something, Peter?
Yeah. I mean, most of you have probably worked with consultants. I'm one of those. We make it 2 by 2. How hard is it going to be to make that innovation, and what's the impact going to be, and the things that are in the corner are the best ones. So that's a very simple version of the process, and I'm saying it a little tongue in cheek. But I think the challenge sometimes, especially working for a university versus a for-profit corporation, is how do we measure that value, right? It's not just the dollars and cents. There's so many different impacts that we can have and that we want to drive. That's where some really nuanced conversations come into play. And that's where I really like kind of what Leo was saying around establishing those goals up front before you really get into the details. What are the things we're trying to accomplish at a high level? What are those sort of tenets or principles we can come back to? As a little example of that, years ago now, we've had the opportunity to work with Johns Hopkins around improving their student experience. And that's been a great journey. They've been a fantastic organization to work with. They're doing some really cool, innovative things. Go ask them. But I remember very early on, we were gathering some information about the current state, understanding where some of the problem points are. We're excited to present it to the steering committee. And one of the things that came up was, you have students who are still, if they want to take a course outside of their core program of study, trudging across campus, maybe going to one of your other campuses with literally a paper index card. And it's taking that, they have to get 3 different signatures and then bring it to the registrar, and hopefully it got filled out right, and someone inputs it in the system. This is creating all these problems. And we had a very good, necessary devil's advocate in that steering committee that was like, so? Show me one student who's ever dropped out of Johns Hopkins. Show me one student who has decided not to come to Johns Hopkins because course registration might be a little bit of a pain in the butt. And luckily, other members of the steering committee said that, but that's not what we're here for, right? We're not thinking about our enrollment. We're okay from that perspective. We're thinking about the student experience, right? Those 3 hours that they're spending trudging around with this card are times they're not doing research, they're not developing relationships with faculty members, they're not networking with other students, they're not experiencing all the things the university has to say. And that tied back to some of the tenets that they had really laid out at the beginning of that project. If they didn't have that, it would have been very easy for that one voice to be sort of a reductionist, this isn't helping our enrollment, this isn't helping our finances, why change it? So I think that sort of approach to thinking about what is it you're really trying to do with these innovations at its core is really important before you really start to get into the details.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Another one out there?
Hi. In the beginning, you were talking about AI and the power to create and use it as a tool to develop and create things. But as every tool that someone used to create, some other used to destroy and to do harm, right? Do you think we should be doing more, or companies should be doing more to prevent more sophisticated cyber attacks, more sophisticated phishing attempts, things that are going to be starting to skyrocket with the use of AI when people start using them to do attacks, right? Are companies like Amazon doing something right now to tackle this down?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, we are definitely thinking about that. We have a free course that people can take on responsible AI and the use of responsible AI. And so whenever we have a product with AI, that's a component of what we think about. The security angle, I think in general, whenever we talk to anybody about the cloud, the first thing you talk about is security. Because if you don't feel like you can put your data in whatever your cloud provider is, that's a foundational issue. So you have to feel comfortable with it. So security is our top priority. And are there certainly threats that I can think of with generative AI and large language models? Sure, I've seen some experiments where you can synthesize voice now, somebody's voice. You can plug that into a ChatGPT thing. So I can think of use cases for phishing. So yeah, we're always thinking about what the threats are and how we can help our customers mitigate those threats and what features and services are needed for that.
Great. Thank you. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think this was a great discussion. Thank you, Peter, Meena, Donna, and Leo. And now we're going to have a networking break in Annenberg Hall. So thank you very much.